Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. In our fifth topic in the Impactful Reminder series, we'll be discussing the issue of difference of opinion and errors. We'll be looking at firstly, what are differences of opinions, where do they arise from, and how do we deal with difference of opinion. And in the second part, we'll be dealing about errors and mistakes. When we see an error, what do we do in this situation? Now, first and foremost, when it comes to difference of opinion, we must first understand that there are places where differences can be accepted and other places where they're not accepted. So if we understand this clearly, that there are two different types of differences. One which can be accepted and one which cannot be accepted. The first type of difference, where we're talking about the accepted type of version, is namely or commonly in issues of fiqh, where you have difference of opinion with matters of fiqh, and it doesn't affect the belief of somebody. Now in fiqh usually is dealing with the Islamic law and how to understand and implement that law. So prayer, fasting, hajj, and all the other areas of Islamic law, marriage and buying and selling, all these different areas, food and drink, they all come into fiqh. Now there are differences of opinions commonly among the four madhab, where we talk about the word difference, it doesn't actually mean like what we think difference or you're wrong and you're right. This is not the correct way of looking at it. Rather, differences mean they have different ways of looking at the opinions and the evidences. So when you, for example, have one madhab does it this way and another madhab does it that way, it's not necessarily that there's an error with one madhab or the other madhab's wrong. It doesn't actually mean that. It means that they are looking at it from a different way. And in times, and there are times, and most commonly and majority of the times, those differences are acceptable differences. They're not like issues where they are like big problems. For example, there are differences of opinion with salah, how some of the scholars differ on some of the finer details of prayer. But when it comes to the actual prayer itself, all camps, all of the four groups, you could say, have acceptable prayer which is accepted before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning they fulfill the criteria of prayer. It's just that the finer details are what make that prayer different. That's it. So for example, there are some that they have different actions that are done, but those actions don't affect the validity of the prayer, meaning they fulfill all the criteria that allows a person to get his prayer done, and there are other sunnahs that are missing, or other sunnahs that are part of it, and it doesn't mean that prayer is invalid. So when someone, for example, he prays behind somebody, he doesn't do the prayer the way he prays, but that prayer is still valid, it's not an issue. So we have to look at the difference when it comes to the issue of fiqh. Is that issue an error, clearly an error, or is that issue something that is a difference and it's acceptable? And again, where can we learn about all of this? Coming through knowledge. A person who will understand difference best is the person who's with knowledge. He will be able to see the differences. He will be able to understand the differences. I'll give you an example, a very simple example. We discussed this in one of our previous topics about Salatul Istikhara. Some of the scholars mentioned that Salatul Istikhara, the dua should be read in the sajda. Some of them say at the end of the prayer, just before the salam, and some of them say prayer right at the end after the prayer is completed. And they use the evidence of the Prophet ﷺ where he said thumma, then he should say the dua, and it's mentioned in the hadith. Now what I'm trying to mention here is that this is a very detailed discussion. I mean, we can go into where to read it and how, but the point is that there are three opinions and all three opinions are valid. We can't say one is wrong or the other is wrong. We accept it, and now someone should choose whatever one they feel comfortable with. Again, where does that come from? With seeking knowledge, sitting with the scholars, learning the opinions, and getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely for Him with that knowledge, and then you will be able to navigate yourself through that journey. So it's very important to understand that the biggest tool that you can have dealing with differences is firstly having knowledge. A person who doesn't know the difference will of course think that it's something wrong when he sees someone do it a different way. This is because he hasn't gained that knowledge enough to be able to traverse through that journey and see these differences. So when he sees an issue that seems like, oh my God, what is this? I can't believe he's doing that. It could be something completely correct. How would you know if it's not correct? Unless you've studied. So you can only know then. So if it's an issue that's a mistake or something that's an error, it's upon you to know. And this is why it's very important to push this point of seeking knowledge to be able to clarify. A lot of the times difference of opinions and issues arise with people that can't accept differences is because of lack of knowledge. They don't have the understanding of what is going on. So that's why knowledge is very important. To know that what you're doing ala basira, to have insight upon it and understanding of it, so that you can navigate through these differences. So as we said, the first type of difference is an issue which is acceptable. Matters of fiqh is usually very common. You're going to get many issues in fiqh, like niqab. Is niqab wajib or not wajib? Some of the madhabs, they differ upon this. Now, some people might have been taught an opinion that you have to wear it, you must wear it, and they have the evidence for that. And some people have been taught that no, it's not, it's recommended to wear it. But what the point that we're trying to say is, look, there's a difference here. Yeah, it's acceptable difference. If someone chooses to cover themselves fully, the correct way, according to the opinion, but they don't cover their hands and face, are they sinning here? Are they falling short here? Are we going to go and argue with them and debate with them? It's an acceptable difference. We should be respectful with each other's viewpoints. And as long as they are fulfilling the criteria of covering according to the Islamic text, but there is only a nuance with the face covering and the hands, this is something that should be respected and not fought over. We shouldn't be fighting over these matters. But there is a thing that we need to mention. If somebody comes and says, I don't need to cover completely, and I don't need to just cover in my heart, well then this is something that we cannot accept. This is not a difference we can accept. We're not saying here that differences mean we completely remove the rules. No, there's boundaries to these differences. Meaning there's differences where it's within the confines of Islam, and there's differences which are outside of the confines of Islam, which are not from the religion. And those differences we do not accept. Okay? And we will look into how to deal with that issue, inshallah ta'ala, later on. Now coming back to the last point, which is the differences that are not accepted. We already mentioned one example. A difference that's not accepted is not within the confines of Islam. If it's a difference that makes that prayer invalid, or if it's a difference that makes that hijab covering no longer be considered an Islamic covering in Islam, then that no longer is an accepted opinion. So we have to look at, with knowledge, understanding again, seeking knowledge, you will understand what differences are from Islam and what differences are not even from the religion. They are just made up. They are not from the religion, they are people following their desires. This is why we need to seek knowledge. The second type of difference where it's not acceptable to have a difference is in issues of belief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ had described to us the correct faith, the way to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way to believe in Him, the way to accept Him. There are majority of the times in these issues, there are no issues of differences. Now, someone will say to you, there are issues of difference in Aqidah. There are. Okay, when it comes to belief, there are differences of opinion, but where? If you look at the early generations, where did they differ? Let's have a look. Some of them differed about the issue regarding finer details of the Day of Judgment. This is very common. Some of them described, like for example, the scale. What will we measure on the scale? Will it be the deeds? Will it be the person? Will it be scrolls? All of these things here are just nuances, but they don't reject the scale. So the details that we're differing over, the Salaf that we're differing over, or the early generations were differing over, were about issues about the finer details. It never negated the fact that deeds will be weighed. It never negated that the believers will get weighed, will get their hisab done. It never negated the idea of the judgment. Rather, they accepted that judgment. They accepted that there will be something to judge, but the scales will be present, but they were differing over the finer details. And this here is an acceptable difference. Why? Because we're not rejecting anything from the belief. Rather, it's just getting to the fine differences. And this is why the early generations, you'll find that when you're going through issues of Aqidah, you'll find that there's no difference when it comes to belief. But the differences only arise when it comes to the finer details. So I hope that makes sense, that even when it comes to Aqidah, we cannot have differences. But the differences, it shouldn't be called difference, it should be called understanding the finer details. Right? But people call it ikhtilaf, and it makes the person think, oh, ikhtilaf, this is a really bad thing. It means there's a problem here, there's an issue of difference, this means there's something must be wrong. La, take this out of your head. When it comes to ikhtilaf, we understand that there's a different way of understanding it, different way of looking at it. So if somebody, for example, says on the Day of Judgment, who's going to be judged first? Is it the believer? Are there even non-Muslims going to be judged? Are they even going to be given accountability? A lot of this stuff comes up. So again, with knowledge you will understand. What we're saying is when we issue, are the non-Muslims going to have, for example, a scale, they mentioned. Are the non-Muslims going to be given a scale? Are they going to have any deeds to be weighed? Because because they don't have any belief in the first place, so they won't have any good deeds. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَإِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ وَلَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Allah says that He's revealed to you and to those before you that if you had committed shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, disbelief, kufr, shirk, وَلَقَدْ أُوحِيَ إِلَيْكَ وَإِلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ لَإِنْ أَشْرَكْتَ لَيَحْبَطَنَّ عَمَلُكَ, that Allah will nullify all your good deeds because of shirk. لَتَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ, that you will become of the losers. Subhanallah. So Allah is revealing to the Prophet Muhammad and to those before him that if he, subhanAllah, committed shirk, that Allah would nullify all his good deeds. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. So what about everyone else? There's min babi awla, as they say. So we have to understand that these are the final differences. This all can come about, all this understanding comes about with knowledge. So understanding, again, ikhtilaf, there's no difference when it comes to Islamic belief. We all accept the pillars of Iman, and we all accept those pillars, but we don't differ on that. What we differ upon, what may be considered a different way of looking at things, is the finer details. And that's it. And that's where it ends. There's no really difference, is there really, if you look at it that way. But if somebody says, no, I don't accept that there will be a scale. I don't accept that a person will be given their books. I don't accept that there's a bridge to cross over hellfire. I don't believe in the judgment of the grave. Here you're rejecting parts of the belief. And here this is now becoming a problematic issue. Some extent it could make you deviate from the true path, and in some extent it could lead a person to وَيَعْذُ بِاللَّهِ disbelief, where a person rejects that their books will be given. This could be something that could nullify the faith. Why? It could. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying it could. Why? Because it depends on how he's seeing that, why he's rejecting it, right? But it could, because Allah mentions it in the Quran, and whatever is mentioned in the Quran is from the truth, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. We can't reject this. Some people may deny the Day of Judgment completely. They may say, I believe in everything, but I don't accept the Day of Judgment. There's no ikhtilaf on this issue. No scholar came and differed on this in history of Islam. In fact, it's part of our belief to believe in the Day of Judgment. And a person rejects it is a disbeliever. Or a person doesn't accept it or doesn't believe in the validity of the Day of Judgment is a kafir, is a non-Muslim. So we have to understand in that issue there's no differences. Where a person ends up rejecting, a person ends up refusing, a person ends up denying or negating or adding to those pillars of Iman, this is unacceptable. And I hope that makes sense, inshallah ta'ala, with the issue of difference of opinion. So let's summarize the issue of difference of opinion. We have differences of opinion in issues of fiqh, where it's acceptable. We have also difference of opinion understanding the finer details about belief. And those finer details we're talking about, like where it's a different way of looking at it. They're not difference of opinion, they're different ways of looking at it. And those are acceptable. And then there are times where there's unacceptable difference of opinion, which are those that which come out, that which are not within the confines of Islam in matters of fiqh. Like a person rejecting, for example, things that should be done from fiqh, or making a different way of doing it which is not accepted within the religion. And there are those where people are rejecting and denying attributes of faith and parts of their faith. And this is very dangerous. We must stress this again. It is very dangerous. So, in summary, the best way to deal with the difference of opinion is knowledge. When a person gains more knowledge, more insight, more understanding to religion, they can deal with these differences. Why? Because they have the understanding of the religion. If they don't have understanding of the religion, they don't have knowledge, they don't have Islamic grounding, they will not be able to deal with these differences. They will not be able to manage with these differences and navigate. They will be confused, they will be like, why is there so many differences, what's going on, how do I deal with it? The last issue for today we're going to talk about is dealing with errors. Now we have some times where you may see scholars talk about other scholars, or may say about another person that he has made a mistake in this area. Now what we have to understand is that it depends on that mistake. For example, there are classical scholars where we may find they have made some errors when it comes to certain matters. But it doesn't take away from their validity of their fiqh and their validity of their contribution towards hadith. But we have to understand that if a person is grounded with knowledge, he is able to see what is an error. And he's able to understand where the error is and give justice to that person. Meaning, a person made a mistake from their tongue. He doesn't genuinely mean it. He's not known to be like that. From the vast time we deal with that person, we see good things. Well, we see one mistake. Are we to write this person off? Are we to say this person is deviated? Are we to say a lot of bad things about the person? We need to be people of justice. Give the person an opportunity, give the person a benefit of the doubt, understand what was that mistake. Was it a very serious mistake? Was it a minor mistake? And again, this comes back to dealing with having knowledge and having understanding and hikmah. A person shouldn't be blasting people off the religion and say he's off it, he's off this, he's off that view, and this is not the way of the scholars. If you look at the scholars of the past, even the scholars of our time today, they were very, 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 very careful before they name a person. If they name a person, they would name it with a benefit and mention a disclaimer, mentioning the reasons why they're naming that person. So we must be very careful that if a discussion happens between people of knowledge about another person, we should really take that with a lot of carefulness and see what is that person of knowledge really saying here. Is he saying that person shouldn't be taken from, or is he saying that one issue that he's got an issue with? That's very important to understand. So if one sheikh says, this sheikh over here, he has an issue in this area, that doesn't mean he's wrong in everything. It could just be that one area. So we have to give that person the benefit of the doubt with regards to the other parts. And if we can clarify what else, should we stay away from them, should we not take from them, that's another issue. But as for if they mentioned a specific area and narrowed it down to that area, doesn't mean that everything else can be wrong. It could be that that area needs to be worked on, and maybe that person may rectify that. But if the error is completely whole scale, where the person is saying wrong things completely, in this case, we should be careful from taking knowledge from that person, because that person may lead you astray. And if there's speech upon that person from people of knowledge and generally the community, then we should be more wiser to that situation and understanding that there is an error here, and what should we do? Now, if you are able to deal with the error and able to advise that person, it's good to deal with it. Yes, it's good to do that. Now, you may find errors come about from your family. You have family members that make mistakes when it comes to religious matters. How do we deal with them? Now, as I said, when it comes to family, you should have a lot of mercy, a lot of softness, and a lot of time and patience, a lot of dua for them. Don't be hasty in blasting off family members and writing them off and ruling them out of the religion, or saying that they are deviated and things like this. This is not from the way of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ had his own uncle who used to not believe in Islam, and he was still loving to him, still kind to him, and still caring for him, and still making dua for him. So this is the example of the Prophet ﷺ. You have families that we have to be very loving, gentle, soft, kind with our families, calling them to the truth with hikmah and wisdom and love, and don't push them away from the religion. If you're soft with your family and kind to them and make a lot of dua for them, surely they will listen. Surely they will come about. So it's very important to take this message away, that when we deal with errors, firstly, when it comes to errors, we need to look at with knowledge and understanding and wisdom. Is the error a serious error or not? Number two, if a scholar has spoken about another person in a specific area, does it mean that the whole thing is wrong? If it does, then we should be careful of that. If it doesn't, then we should give justice to that person and try and clarify from the people of knowledge what they mean by that. And if it's something that there is a small mistake, then we should overlook this and try to go and to speak to that person. We know the correct way. If we can't, then it's fine. And when it comes to family and friends, we should be very tolerant and patient when it comes to different. As for somebody who makes some mistakes and calls to that and is stubborn about their ways, there is no kindness to this person. We don't be kind to that person. In fact, we speak to that person and tell them they are wrong, and we try to tell other people about this person to be careful of them. What we're saying is, not with family and friends, we're saying if somebody publicly comes out and preaches wrong things and he's stubborn on that way and he's been given advice and he's persisting, we should tell people to be careful of that matter. Tell them, look, this person over here has been saying this, be careful of them, because this thing isn't correct. In that case, we should speak against the falsehood there, and we should tell people about it, but not going to the extent where we're blasting them and their character and saying horrible things about them, backbiting about them, saying things which will get sin upon us. Talk about the matter at hand, and that's it. Leave it at that. Don't entertain any lewdness and free speech about that person and start going and character defaming and assassinating that person, character assassinating that person. This is incorrect. We shouldn't be doing this type of things. What we're saying is we should be very gentle and fair and just, and mention the mistake, and that's it. And say, this is the mistake that was mentioned. As for everything else, I don't know about how they are, but I know that this area here, they clearly have a problem here, and we need to be careful of this, especially as they've been advised and mentioned it. I hope that inshallah benefits everyone, inshallah ta'ala, when it comes to this issue of differences. It's not something that is very easy to deal with. It's not something that's very straightforward. We just thought we'd give a small little reminder on this matter. But be aware, be very, very aware that this issue of differences and errors, we need to have a lot of knowledge and insight and wisdom when it comes to dealing with it. Because sometimes you may see an issue that could be minor, and you make it massive, and ends up taking the person away from the religion because they end up getting upset and harmed. So be very careful how you are. Be very soft and gentle in your ways. Be very understanding and wise, and be patient, inshallah ta'ala. We ask Allah to make this a benefit for everyone that's listening. We hope that when it comes to dealing with differences and errors, we are very, inshallah ta'ala, wiser to it and more understanding to it. We ask Allah to make us of those people. Barakallahu feekum. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.